So, thanks for joining us today. And we're going to be talking about text analytics and natural language processing from molecule to market. My name's Jane Reed, and I'm Director of Life Science at Lingomatics, and I'm joined by Catherine Inish, who's an application scientist at Lingomatics. And we're really going to be telling you how natural language processing can transform unstructured text into actionable data. So just to run you through the format of the webinar in the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to give you an introduction to Lingomatics and to what is natural language processing based text mining and where it can bring value from bench to bedside. So throughout drug discovery, drug development, and into delivery of therapeutics into the clinic. We've got some case studies from our top pharma and healthcare organizations. And then Kat's going to give you a demo of our natural language processing solution. For questions, please use the webinar Q&A form during the webinar, and we'll address these at the end. So firstly, a little bit about Lingomatics to begin. As you may know, Lingomatics is an IQVIA company, part of the overall IQVIA brand, but very much operating as an independent company. We're headquartered in Cambridge, UK, and we have our US headquarters in Marlborough, just outside Boston. So Lingomatics provides software and consulting, which we deliver based on enterprise and cloud solutions. Our core platform is a natural language processing or NLP based text analytics platform. What NLP is really about is extracting and synthesizing knowledge from text, going way beyond standard keyword search. The software is out of the box and ready to use straight away, and I'll go into more detail in the next slides. We're focused on solving problems for life science and healthcare organizations. We work with 19 of the top 20 global pharma companies, as well as lots of smaller life science companies. We also work with healthcare provider and payer organizations. Our largest user base for healthcare is in the US, where we have a really strong customer base. And we work with the US government and organizations such as the FDA and NASA. We're actually very proud that NASA is using our Lingomatics software to mine astronaut data, which is quite exciting. So first of all, to set the scene, if you think about the pipeline from molecule to market, from drug discovery through development and into delivery and commercialization of therapeutics, insight is needed at every stage to answer questions and get through decision gates. And to get the full picture, knowledge from unstructured text is critical. For example, kind of 1 o'clock here, early on in target discovery, we might be interested in searching the biomedical literature for specific genes involved in a key therapeutic area, such as cancer. We might want to think about what could be the optimal sites for phase 1 or phase 3 clinical study, obviously needing very different characteristics. Around at 7 o'clock here, we might want to dig into clinical notes to understand who are my high-risk patients, what are the care gaps in my patient population, or use real-world data, whether that's medical records or social media, to understand patient-reported outcomes. And answers to all of these questions will help support business and healthcare decisions. So to get these answers, everyone is familiar with standard keyword search. But keyword search is limited and resource intensive. It's not systematic or comprehensive. In this schematic, you can see I'm doing a search for breast cancer. I type in the words and the search engine goes away and finds all the documents that have keywords in them. This could be in Medline for scientific abstracts or Google Scholar or even your internal search engines. But what you get back then is a long list of documents. And bringing back documents means it's up to you to read through each document and decide whether it's of relevance, and then extract the information you need.
You know, you can either pull back too many hits, you can pull back noisy or irrelevant hits, or depending on what keywords you put in, you might not actually find all the information you want. So this is some slightly old snapshots, but you're thinking, you know, if I search for breast cancer, I've got 4.5 million results. Breast carcinoma, I've got a different number. Breast neoplasm, a different number. And yet, in many ways, if you're doing that broad search, that what targets are involved in breast cancer, you would really want to have all of those different words combined together. So really, what you're getting back is documents for that manual review. And it's difficult to then even ask open questions or pull out the connections. So this is a quote I like. It's an old one now, but it's by Marty Hirsch. He is an expert at University of California, Berkeley. And she's really defining text mining as the discovery by computer, so obviously that's the AI technology, of new or previously unknown information by automatically extracting and relating information from different written resources to reveal otherwise hidden meanings. So linking together the extracted information. And that's in essence what our text mining is doing. You provide it with a set of ideas, the queries you want it to run, and it can then automatically extract the information that's relevant. So if I ever have to kind of explain what our NLP does in one slide, this is the slide I choose. So if there's any message you want to take away from today, it's really this one. What we can do is generally people come to us and they say, I'm not getting the value I need from my scientific literature or my safety reports. Or I'm trying to understand everything on Twitter related to COVID-19, to take a current example. So they'll have a set of documents. They'll have this left-hand side, sorry. They'll have a set of documents. They can be all sorts of documents from as long as patents or regulatory reviews to as short as tweets or customer verbatims. They'll have some idea, the domain knowledge of what they want to get out of there. And then we can apply some metadata. So that might be things like ontologies or information around the documents. And with all of that information, we can then build what we call an index. And this is a bespoke process that Lingomatics has developed. And it's using these tools at the bottom: natural language processing, linguistic detection, part of speech tagging, applying ontologies, applying statistical methods and machine learning, putting in chemistry knowledge, regular expressions. And all of that creates a very rich index, which you can now use to build sophisticated queries. And that gives you this little table in the middle is one of the outputs. So the square in the middle, on the right-hand side of the square, you've got some little snippets of text that are marked up in yellow and blue and pink. And you can see that we're trying to pull out metrics around ejection fraction. So you can show that for ejection fraction, you've either got EF at the top line or ejection fraction again, EF again. So all of those are being structured into the left-hand column, just ejection fraction. You've then got numerics, 55%, 30%, or ranges here. And those are again extracted into this ejection fraction column and normalized in places. So if it's greater than 65%, that's normalized to a particular value or a range. And then in places it talks about whether it's estimated or calculated. And again, we can pull out that. So we've taken textual snippets from de-identified patient records, and we've turned that into columns of data. And once you've got these structured columns, then you can start feeding analytics and outcomes. So very simply, you could push that into statistical models to see, for example, if ejection fraction was correlating with a different value. You can push that into machine learning models or graphs, or you can simply take these kind of tables in Excel or as these HTML markups, and then read and review and filter the data as you need. So just a little bit more about the linguistic processing. So what natural language processing really does is interprets the meaning of the text, and it has to do that in several stages. So first of all, it understands, for example, that this group of words is a meaningful word, a meaningful phrase, it's a sentence. And then it'll look for different forms of words. So it'll find noun groups. So here you've got E42 Mac K and CMIB, serine, threonine, these are all noun groups. It'll find the verb groups to match the actions. So phosphorylates, phosphorylate. And then it can also understand the morphology. So find and found being part of the same verb form. And so with that, we can then build those queries. So we can understand what nouns are related to other nouns with that verb in the middle, and we can understand the context. And this is really valuable because when you're trying to get the meaning from unstructured text, there are very many different ways in which to say the same thing. And if we break that down a little more, the top left of this quadrant, everyone's very familiar with the fact that people use synonyms, different words with the same meaning. But if you think about it, that goes back to that keyword search If you're trying to find all the documents around cyclosporin, or maybe look for safety events, you want to be able to make sure you've got all the different ways people would describe that. Slightly more complicated, you might think about different expressions that have the same meaning. So here we're on the left-hand side, right-hand side, you've got different ways of describing a non-smoker. Now, you're not going to code does not drink or smoke as a hardwired synonym for non-smoker. But being able to develop a natural language processing rule to always capture that, that's really important for your patient data. Similar to that one, you've got different grammar with the same meaning. So again, thinking back to that drug dosage information, if you're looking for safety levels, efficacy thresholds, then making sure that you can capture all the different ways people are describing 5 mg per kg per day, whether it's per day or per diem, with or without the drug in the phrase. That's important. The bottom right-hand side is slightly different. Here's where keyword search might pull back all of these documents, all of these different patient records diagnosed with diabetes or family history of diabetes. But here the context is critical, because obviously a patient with no family history of diabetes or even family history of diabetes is very different from a particular patient that's been diagnosed. So that's where that being able to break down a sentence, understand all the words within the sentence, and then understand the context for the important concepts that you're looking for is critical. So thinking about this slide here, what we can do is we can find all the different ways people describe a thing, an expression, a grammatical structure, and we call that normalization. So again, if you're thinking about finding all those genes related to breast cancer, you want to be able to find different ways and normalize that to breast neoplasm. And that's the same for things like different genes. But here you might find different morphological forms. So RAF-1, RAF space I, they both mean RAF1. Being able to capture those is really important. We've talked already briefly about measurements, about the ejection fraction, being able to capture however people are describing numerics. Mutations is really valuable. And then behaviors, and then even the chemistry and the relationships. The data normalization, being able to do that conversion from a term in text to a standardized form is really fundamental if you want to take the information and integrate it, for example, with data from structured databases, data from other sources. So very simply, for example, being able to map across different disease ontologies. So if you're capturing information from adverse events in MEDRA, being able to map that to ICD-10 codes, that mapping is very valuable. And being able to do that normalization is a step in that. So again, just thinking a little bit more about that advantage of being able to use those ontologies that we provide for that normalization. If you're again thinking about that simple question, what genes are known to affect breast cancer? The fact that we plug in ontologies that can describe human genes with one concept within our environment, and that will capture all of these, maybe thousands of terms. And similarly, if you're thinking about how to affect breast cancer, breast cancer, breast carcinoma, cancer of the breast, again, could be hundreds of terms. So trying to think about a simple question, what genes are known to affect breast cancer, if you're trying to use a keyword approach, it can end up being a really unmanageable query. So being able to say, okay, I'm looking for all the human genes with a gene-disease relationship associated with breast neoplasm. And that's a much more straightforward, clean, effective way to ask that question and to get the structured information back. So this is just a snapshot of that kind of query. This is looking for biomarkers or genes involved in breast cancer, but particularly looking for biomarker discovery. So the query was, what genes are involved as biomarkers in breast cancer? And you can see we've got a column of genes coming back from that ontology with built from Ontrogene with all the and other sources with all the human genes and proteins. We've got a set of phrases that point to biomarkers, prognosis biomarkers, early biomarkers, and so forth. We found all the different ways breast cancer is being described in the snippet of text. We see the link to the document. And then just having this highlighted sentence can be hugely valuable and can really mean that, particularly when you're reviewing large documents, being able to be taken to the right place in the document with that highlighted view of the concepts that you're interested in and the context is really a big productivity gain. So while that example we just talked about was from Medline, we have customers and clients looking at scientific literature, both full text and abstracts, patents, at electronic healthcare records, at internal safety or regulatory reports, at drug labels and other drug information, at clinical trial records or clinical trial protocols, over social media, or the bottom snippet is from news feeds where you're trying to understand information around mergers and acquisitions between different companies. So really, it's a very powerful tool which can answer challenges related to, I have a lot of unstructured text and myself or my team are hindered by the amount of time it's taking to manually review that text in order to pull out the key insights I need. So to summarize, when we're thinking about that, the value of text mining versus standard keyword search, if you're trying to get our example, what genes affect breast cancer, you may be able to build a search query, but even if you have a really well-built query to get good precision, good recall, you still have to then read all those documents to find the information you need. Whereas if you're thinking about text mining, this information extraction, being able to use natural language processing, you can create your gene, your relationship, and your disease queries, and then you pull out this nice structured format with a highlighted text to really make it very easy to review. So we have clients who've been using our natural language processing software for the last 15 years. In many ways, we started off very much looking at scientific literature on the sort of left-hand side, the pre-discovery, early discovery phases. Again, doing that gene disease mapping, genotype-phenotype associations, using it for target identification, target selection for particular drug projects. But as people have got familiar with it, and as people have got more sophisticated with what data sources are available, you've spread from this sort of left-hand side, biomarker discovery, as we've talked about, into how can I use natural language processing to help with my trial site selection, with my study design? How can I use it for key opinion leader identification? How can I use it for opportunity scouting, regulatory information, competitive intelligence, voice of the customer, or social? So really, again, everywhere where you think, okay, I know that my teams are struggling with too much unstructured text to read, and we're not getting that systematic, comprehensive overview of the data that we want. So a few more slides before I hand over to John. And thinking back to this slide, I could tell you a story, I could tell you a customer use case for every one of these boxes, probably 5 or 6 customer use cases. But I picked a few that kind of skip across the whole right from sort of target discovery all the way through to real world data. And again, if there's ones here that you're interested in, we can provide more information. Or if you look at this blue slide and you think, actually, I'm really interested to understand a bit more about opportunity scouting, for example, then again, please do drop us a note and we can give you some more information. So starting off first, thinking about that discovery, and this is a workflow that Pfizer have built in order to really keep their science teams up to date with patent literature. Now, obviously, patents are really valuable. They provide the first mention of really critical data around drug targets, chemistry, disease areas, and so forth. But it's notoriously hard to search their long documents. They're often written, not to inform, but to in obtuse language. And when they were doing manual review, they found that on average, to find targets for 3 therapeutic areas, it was taken 50 FTE days across a team of different specialities, subject matter experts. So they built a workflow incorporating our NLP to extract the target, the indication,
invention type, so small molecule or biologic, and the organization. And that's updated automatically on a weekly basis across 3 big registries for full text patents, USPTO, WIPO, and EPO. And that's then loaded into a database for really easy consumption by their end users. You can see the recall is tenfold what they were getting with manual processes, with the precision just as good. And it's really enabled them to drastically reduce the resource required to keep their research scientists up to date on recent findings published in patent literature. And this is the sort of dashboards that they've been able to build on top. So you can see on the top left, we've got the dashboard for particular disease area, fibrosis, and the top right for particular protein. And you can see it's very easy to consume, very easy to get that overview, that landscape of information around targets and diseases. Moving on a little bit, thinking about using NLP over clinical trial data. So clients have used natural language processing from a variety of different drug pipeline clinical trial databases, such as TrialTrove, clinicaltrials.gov. And it's really thinking about how digital innovation, how, again, moving from that document-based to data-focused decision support, it can really enhance every stage of clinical trials. And I've just pulled out one particular one. Again, if you're interested in the clinical trial analytics, we have much more information. But this was just a very simple one, thinking about mining clinicaltrials.gov for clinical trial intelligence. And this is something that many of our clients are working on to pull out how other people are designing studies. How are they doing inclusion and exclusion criteria, patient selection, those kind of things. So the Lilly Competitive Intelligence Clinical Group wanted to get the landscape of phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, testing 2 or 3 drugs in combination for autoimmune disease. Manually, I think they spent about a week and only found 7 trials. So they turned to one of their experts who used NLP to very rapidly look through clinicaltrials.gov, the lingomatic index of this. It took him about an hour to build a query, and he was able to find more than 300 trials that tested 2 or 3 drugs and able to extract the data in a very nice, clean, structured format, making it very easy to feed that back to the clinical trial group. Thinking then, moving back to safety, obviously safety is something that, Pharma is hugely concerned about. Being able to make sure that, again, any information that's generated during safety or that's information is also sought from literature, from other reports during safety. So really being able to use the information, whether that's in drug discovery and development and into post-market, at all stages, product teams need the most comprehensive view of the relevant data to enable them to make the right decisions. So thinking about, again, a safety use case, this is obviously in post-market, where we're looking at verbatims that come into, in this case, CSL Behring. They've presented a webinar for us. And it's being able to more rapidly process those case reports by getting the adverse event coding automated using natural language processing. So obviously, adverse events are often reported. They come into all our pharma clients, reported in natural language, and they have to be standardized to MedDRA for data processing. And this manual coding of the verbatims can be very time-consuming. On average, it maybe takes just a minute or 2, but it can take up to 30 minutes. And the little example here, I got really ill the other day, had a horrible headache, and couldn't sleep for 2 days. Now, headache, that can be auto-coded because it's a direct match to a MedDRA term. But couldn't sleep, you need to be able to code that to sleeplessness. And yet that's something that has to be done manually. So this was a project that we did with CSL Behring, and they wanted to be able to increase from 30% auto-coding to 60%. So we worked with them, with their domain experts, to build strategies to handle the 70% of their verbatims that needed manual coding. And we were able to generate mappings and compare that to the manual coding. So we were indeed able to double the level of auto-coding, which is what they wanted,
we reviewed, and there was less than 5% mismatch. And many of those actually, when you went and dug into what they had given us as their training set, many of those were actually due to manual code issues and not necessarily due to the natural language processing. So overall, the use of natural language processing reduced the manual coding time by 50%, improved the coding consistency, and obviously going forward, it can reduce the risk for case processing and medical evaluation. Just a couple more. So one thing that we're seeing more and more with our client base is some of those use cases I've just been talking about, thinking about pulling the right information from one particular source in order to answer a core challenge, information for clinicaltrials.gov or coding for verbatims. But sometimes it's really important to capture the right information from a broad variety of different data sources in order to get the landscape around any particular challenge. And so here we've got an offering, Insights Hubs, which enables you to scan and ingest information from a number of different sources, make sure that the queries are designed to pull the right information from all of these different sources, and then surface these for users in dashboards and in search portals to make it really easy to consume. So this is an example from Novo Nordisk. It's actually an award-winning one. We won the Innovative Practices by IT World a year ago with this. And it's they built this Insights Hub to really identify market trends and detect patterns from a range of different sources. So they're particularly looking at medical information requests, medical insights, at MSL notes, at scientific literature, conference abstracts, news, and social media. And they particularly want to be able to pull in information around their key products and then around diabetes. So they use NLP to build rules to capture the right information from all of these different sources, visualizing Tableau, and the whole workflow is integrated in Amazon Web Services to make the automation really effective and for global access. And this has been enabling them to keep a very close awareness of their brands, how their brands are performing in the market, and really get that kind of voice both from healthcare professionals, from patients, from the MSLs as to what people are talking about their products. And it's really been able to broaden access to the insights you can get from this kind of real-world data across a global team. So they've been building dashboards. So example here, what our healthcare professionals are asking about placement therapy for Rybelsus. So you can see, the insights at the top right-hand corner is looking for placement in therapy. You get different drill downs as you would do with any dashboard. This is looking at Twitter insights again for Rybelsus. Who's talking about Rybelsus? What are they talking about? Where are they talking about it? And really, this is a quote from Thierry Briat, who's a champion of this Insights Hub. And I just like the top line. This gives us a comprehensive 360-degree view of what the world is saying. And I think that's really what NLP can enable. It can enable you to get the full picture of information from a lot of different sources in order to understand what's going on and answer questions. So the last one is moving right through into the clinic, and this is using NLP over electronic medical records. So this is a particular use case for Bristol Myers Squibb, where they wanted to better understand the heterogeneity around heart failure in order to really understand how they could better stratify patients for clinical trials and for treatment. So they wanted to really get a much more granular understanding of how information from electronic medical records, diagnostic information, disease outcomes could help cluster. So they got information for about 900 patients, and they used the NLP to extract and normalize nearly 40 different variables, demographic variables, clinical information, echocardiographic information, such as ejection fraction, grade of diastolic function, left ventricular mass, and so forth. So, the little schematic at the bottom is you can capture information from the physician summary, from the diagnostic images. That's use an OCR process to extract that as text. It comes out as unnormalized text, and then they would need to use NLP to convert that into standardized values for analysis. So across those 900 different patients, they're able to pull out that broad set of information and then feed into models to get clusters. And they were able to find 4 distinct groups based on clinical variables, ECG, and mortality. And that approach really enabled them to stratify patients for heart failure risk. And that was enabled them to improve their clinical trial design and identify unmet needs. So that was a very brief walk through those 5 different use cases. Again, if any of those use cases speak to you and you'd like more information, please do contact us. But I'll now hand over to Kat, who's going to give you a demonstration of our software.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you a demonstration of the i2e software. I'm going to demonstrate a couple of the things that Jane has just been talking about. So let's first consider if we wanted to do a target analysis based on Crohn's disease. So the information I'm showing you up on the screen here is similar to one of the examples Jane showed in her slides. So we have our disease, we have the relation, and then we have our gene. And the columns you'll see have got a color attached to them, and that color is being shown in our hit highlighting in the corresponding shades. Now this is a clustered and normalized results table, and that means that we're clustering based on our left-handed column moving through to our right-hand column. And this makes it easy to explore the data by expanding columns out. So for example, if I expand on Crohn's disease here, you can see all the different relationship types. Moving on to the proteins, and again, if I expand on treat, see all the different proteins that have a treat relationship with Crohn's disease. Now this particular question I asked here was an open question. So I defined Crohn's disease using a disease ontology, which is based on the National Cancer Institute and MESH, and then applied a relationship ontology. And in this case, I set my relationship ontology to be a disease-gene relationship ontology. And then I left my gene and protein wide open using one of the very initial branches of the gene and protein ontology. So this was essentially left open to saying, bring me back any gene or protein that you can find a relationship to this disease. So now we can take a look at some of the hits, and we can see that we're starting to see some of the things that Jane was talking about. So we've got that morphological variance showing up in our relationship. We're finding not just the word treat as a keyword, but we're actually finding the different variations. So we have treatments, we have treated, have treatment. And if I scroll down, I see various different variations, all normalizing back to this understanding that the relationship is a treat relationship. But we're also bringing across extra content. So with our slightly faded color, we're bringing back that additional information that allows us to have a greater understanding of the relationship. So we're bringing back effective and is frequently. All the pieces of information that allow us to have a greater understanding of what that treat relationship actually means between our 2 defined entities. The other great thing about i2e is that we have the link back to the original documents, but we can also click on the highlighted text as Jane infers, and that's going to jump us immediately to that particular section where our relationship was found in the document. It's applying the highlighting to the document, which means we can very quickly identify where the information is coming from our document and immediately make a decision around whether this is a document we want to carry forward with or investigate further. So this is quite a straightforward but very powerful query. And it's one of the queries that will actually be available to you fresh out of the box where you can essentially change these 3 different criteria using drag and drop techniques. So it's really easy to use directly out of the box. We're going to now carry our TNF gene protein forward and consider, well, if we want to investigate more around this particular gene and protein in relation to Crohn's disease, we might ask a question along the lines of, well, what substances interact with this particular gene and protein? So I'm going to show you a set of results now that how asking that exact question. And this is a different way that we can visualize the results. So we still have the table format, but now we have these charts down the side, and each chart corresponds to one of our colored columns. And this means that we can dice up our data quickly and easily on screen, which I'll demonstrate for you in a second. But before I do that, let's just take a look at some of the extra columns we have here. So we have some additional descriptors. So we have state, which is additional states around our substances. So we have some substances that are antibodies, some substances that are the blockade. So we have additional description for our substance class. We still have our relation, and we have the normalization being carried out in that relation in the same way as we had in our previous query. But now we have some additional context being pulled out. We have this not, inverse, and hypothetical additional pieces of information. And I'm going to scroll down and show you how the chart filters can highlight these very quickly, and we can see the types of results we get from that additional context. So let's start by having a look at not. So we've now filtered our table results. So we're only showing table results that have something in the not column. And if we look to our hit and look for our purple, we can see the context that that not is being used in. So we can see that it's been definitely established that between our 2 entities, our substance and our gene, there is no particular relation surrounding the relationship type involved. So let's take a look at the hypothetical relation. I'm just going to expand back into the full not so we get as many as possible. And now we can see that we're finding hypothetical words. We've got the word potential coming up in this hit. We have the word indicated, the word suggested, could. So normalizing back to a hypothetical relationship, we're pulling out this additional context surrounding our relationship types. And we're saying pulling out 3 different key ones here and easily being able to view them in our hits. The other great thing about this particular charting view is it means that you can get an idea of the timescale landscapes of publications really quickly. If I switch to an A to Z view rather than a document count view and scroll down to find our year column, I'm going to be able to see the landscape for the number of documents in my data source over a particular year period very quickly. So I can understand, is it trending up? Is it trending down? Is it producing a bell curve? Or from my original result. The other great thing about this view is we still have these links, so we can still link immediately to our source documentation. But it also means that if we want to exclude from our export, we can just unselect our hits and then export the results without those particular rows attached. So this makes it really easy to narrow down and get a short list that we might want to do a higher level review by reading the entire paper. Let's move forward again, and this time let's take the substance adalimumab and let's have a look at the clinical trial landscape that's been happening for Crohn's disease around this particular substance, because we have an indirect relationship here between our Crohn's disease and the substance via TNF. So let's investigate what's going on in the clinical trial view. So now, utilizing the clinical trial dataset, we have our drug intervention, we have our intervention name, once again utilizing ontologies. And then we have our Crohn's disease, again, utilizing ontologies. And once again, we have a clustered view, so we can scroll up and expand out. If I just scroll that one up, we'll notice that here, we're not just finding the substance, but we're also finding brand names. So the ontologies has the power within those synonyms, not only to find different expressions of the substance, but also to locate the brand names within them as well. And we have ontologies that are finding our company information. And we can quickly see that we have a very nice structured overview here of the clinical trials in general that allows us to quite quickly see the landscape and pick out interesting trials for Crohn's disease in relation to that one particular substance that we were looking for. And again, we have these links to the original documents, either through the document link or with the highlighting by the hit. That means you don't have to keep logging in and out of data sets to explore. You can link between data sets very quickly and explore information without having to remember lots of different passwords. So I've shown you here 2 of the available source data sets through I2E, but we can also investigate by indexing and applying NLP to information that's not public available, so to company information. So we can utilize things like transcripts from call centers, we can look at Twitter feeds, we can look at forums. So let's look at an example of some data for Humira, and let's look at some results that have been pulled from a hypothetical set of call center transcripts. So here we have some voice of the customer information where we've been recording the questions that have been asked as they come into a call center. We've then indexed all that free text that's been gathered, and we've divided the queries up into topics. So the topic we're deciding to look for in this particular case is food-related questions. We have various subtopics here. So customers have been asking about what's the inactive ingredients in Humira, what dietary restrictions, and what dose can they take with food. And again, we've got clustered results, which we've expanded out. We have the evidence. So how do we know it's a food and an active ingredient? And we have that section of evidence highlighted within the hit. So we could jump right into the transcript with our highlighted hit. And then we also have pulling out, using that sentencing ability that Jane was talking about, the verbatim question. So we can see not only the evidence for the active ingredients, but we can see the verbatim question here as well. And this allows us to get a really good understanding of what kind of questions are the patients interested in. So I really hope that this demonstration has been able to show you some of the ways that NLP can be leveraged in order to have a place in your life science pathways all the way from bench to bedside. And I will hand you back to the organizer now so that we can take some questions.
I just have one wrap-up slide to show. One moment. Oh, I need to share my screen. So thanks for the demo. I hope that brought it to life and really showed you how natural language processing can help tackle some of those challenges, whether that's thinking about that discovery and development in commercial, post-market, and so forth. So just to summarize, why use natural language processing? It really means that you can start thinking about using that 80% of life science information that's in unstructured text. And the little schematic on the right here, that iceberg, is just reminding you that while it's very easy, obviously, to start doing statistics and modeling and visualize structured data, as I said, nearly 80% of life science information, relevant information, is buried in unstructured text. Critical information can be locked in internal and external documents. And as we've discussed, keyword search, manual creation is slow and tedious and limited. So natural language processing can transform that wealth of internal and external textual data into high value actionable insights. You can use it to synthesize information from many sources, to provide evidence for business decisions, and it enables you to deepen understanding and identify novel connections and get that landscape, that 360-degree view in order to solve your challenges. So I hope that was very useful. I hope that was interesting. And we'll now hand over to Melanie for a few questions. I think we're slightly overrunning.
Hi there. I'm just looking through the questions here. So I've had a question as we're kind of reaching time. I'm not sure we can do this, but someone has asked if we can show how to build the queries. And with this, how to extend solution with the new synonyms.
I think that's a really cool question, but to be honest, I think Melanie, you're absolutely right. I think that's something that if the person interested would like, we can very easily set up a half-an-hour call with someone like Kat, who one of our experts who can walk you very briefly through the interface and give you that hands-on feel that you need.
Mm-hmm. Then we have here from the same person, is it possible to combine it with further post-processing, for example, in Python?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So we have, Kat showed you the results views, and those are the kind of standard HTML tables. But basically you can take that, you can export from our platform in things like JSON format and XML format in very many different formats. So, straight GSV, and we can build either. So you can either do that export and then use Python and other tools on Spotify and so forth with that data, or we can actually build workflows. We have workflow tools that enables you to build behind the scenes a workflow that automatically runs those queries and then pushes the information into Python as needed.
Okay, and this person has also asked if you can speak a bit more about data normalization.
So, I mean, I suppose it depends on so bottom line is the kind of standard out of the box tools that we have for normalization tend to use the big public domain ontologies that Kat mentioned. So we were looking at things like Mesh, and I talked about Medra. We were looking at things like NC Thesaurus. We can use things like Chebi, but we can also build, if you have internal vocabularies or ontologies that you want to normalize to, or if you want to use, let's say, UniProt IDs because you want to normalize to another ontology, then that kind of mapping, you can also use our platform to do that sort of mapping. And then we also use, we mentioned briefly being able to do things like pattern ontologies, so things like dates and dosages and mutations. For that, we've built, you can't really do a dictionary approach for those and a standard ontology, but you can build ontologies of patterns in order to be able to find all those. So again, I think possibly a follow-on conversation, a follow-on call would really provide more insights for some of these questions.
Okay, another one here. So does the NLP engine support only text in English?
Very good question, one we get asked a lot. So obviously it's most powerful in English, but the platform itself is language agnostic. We've worked with all of the, certainly all the top 5 European languages, Chinese, Japanese. If you're looking for kind of, so a couple of the challenges with non-English languages is that ontology power that we've just been talking about. If you don't have a really good dictionary of diseases in Kazakhstani, for example, then that's something you'll have to build yourself, because the public domain dictionaries ontologies tend to be English language first. Things like Medra covers 13 different languages. But out of the box for the things like the part of speech tagging, the linguistic processing, you can plug in. So it's a very open platform. So if you have named entity recognition tools in different languages, then we have an API to plug that in. So in essence, yes, NLP can work with any language. Practically, it's going to work best for you. It's going to be more straightforward if we're working in those EU top 5, the common languages, Chinese, Japanese, where we've already done a lot of development and there are already dictionaries to use out of the box.
Okay, another one here. So which is the model of the database that is formed as a result of NLP? Relational, non-relational, network?
So, I mean, the information that's extracted is exactly what Kat showed you. So, we were looking at tables of results tables where generally you're looking at either concept, relationship, concept pair, or potentially concept, relationship, concept. So obviously that's perfectly amenable to kind of RDF formats, knowledge graphs, and so forth. But in the example that I started off when I was presenting slides, we were just looking at a parameter value pair. So in essence, the results that we get sort of out of the box from the software can be transformed into almost any other format. And we have workflows to enable that. As I said, we have about 8 different output formats, TSV, Excel, JSON, XML, HTML. So we have a number of different formats that can enable you to then start kind of, building other transforms and, being able to use things like network graphs, RDF, and so forth.
Okay, and then one last question here, it would seem. So can you use SNOMED from NIH or I think it's Unified Medical Language System?
Yeah, so both SNOMED is something that we've worked on quite a lot for some of our clients. UMLS is something that we use as well. We don't use all of UMLS. We take certain portions, but there's no, I mean, again, as we mentioned earlier, our NLP platform is quite an open architecture. So we have a particular ontology format, and you can transform other external ontologies or your own proprietary ontology or dictionaries into that format to make it very easy to load into the system and therefore use those kind of ontologies. Obviously, you need to have the right licensing for things like Medra, but yes, technically it's perfectly feasible.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Jane and Catherine, for presenting today, and thank you for everyone who joined us for the presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, everyone.